You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, I got a bunch of people joining us today. I got Lisa, the Occult Reject Mad Scientist herself. I got the Headless Giant. I got the OG, Robby Marx. We got Ethan Indigo, and we got two guests joining us tonight. We got Juan from Juan on Juan podcast. We had him on to talk about the homunculus, and I really wanted to get him back on. I thought we had a good chat. And we got the OG himself too, Paul Joseph Rovelli. We've had him on the show before. He's got a bunch of books. He's got his own Gnostic church. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, I highly suggest to go turn this one off, go back, listen to that one, and then come back to this one. But yeah, Paul, thank you very much for coming on, and Juan, I really appreciate it as well. Real quick, I'll let you two guys plug your show. Juan, real quick, let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work, please, sir.
Appreciate you having me on, man. You can find me at www.tjojp.com. All my stuff is on there, and I'm everywhere. You can find a podcast, YouTube, Rumble, all that good stuff. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. You want to promote any of the type of stuff that you actually talk about on your show? Because that might interest some of my listeners.
Honestly, I talk about whatever interests me, but mostly I talk about the occult, esoteric, magic, mostly alchemy, maybe some conspiracy sprinkled in there every now and again. But
nice.
honestly, it's whatever I find interesting at the time. But mostly
that's perfect.
History and the occult.
Awesome. Good for you, man. Good for you. And thanks again for coming on. And Paul, let everybody know where they can find you. And I guess maybe give a little bit of a background about what your deal is. I mean, he is an author and he has a ton of books. So if you want to promote any of those, please go ahead.
Well, if you want, since this is what we're talking about, I could start with, Thelema and the Greek Qabalah. And if you come to our church, you get the really dumbass original print of that, you know what I'm saying? But go for this one online. It's better. But, I figured I'd be a little bit of a salesman there and start there. The Thelemic Qabalah, which you wanted to talk about today, has these fascinating covers in different colors for all 4 volumes. So I'd show you the other 3, but, you got the idea.
Yes. Thank you very much.
You'll find my books on Amazon.com. I have a blog under my full name, Paul Joseph Rovelli, at blogspot.com. Is it pauljoseph.rovelli.blogspot.com? Something like that. GCLVX.org is our main website where you can learn a lot about us. We're called the Gnostic Church of Light. I founded it, the first fully owned and operating Gnostic church on the continents of the Americas. And we're very active on Reddit. We and Facebook. We do some on X and some on Tumblr. And we have a major YouTube channel. The Gnostic Church of Light. Light is spelled L.V.X. So that, we pronounce it light. It's lux, the Latin word for light, but put an abbreviation for some Kabbalistic reasons.
Nice,
and that's a small synopsis of, my last 3 days of living.
Okay, thank you. Nice. So, yeah, I do know, we were thinking about talking about, I guess, Thelema and the Greek Qabalah, Thelemic and Greek Qabalah, but I know we also did talking about your past, so I guess it depends on really which one you want to go with first.
Well, do you want to, in order to talk about Qabalah, we're talking about a spiritual process. With Thelema, the importance came to understanding the important Kabbalistic concepts, but removing the Judaic religion from those concepts. Okay. And that's the only way to begin to understand Thelema in its origin, Kabbalistically speaking. And then you have to trace that back through Greek culture and the Western mystery tradition. Thelema is very syncretic. So it takes from the superstitious Abrahamic culture at the same time. Crowley was still at his root very obsessed with Christianity. He was just trying to repair it, so to speak.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, Moda would write that, Thelemites would call ourselves the true Christians. I'm not so sure I agree with that, because I'm an anti-Christian kind of a guy. And so I see a grave problem with the Jesus egregore, as Moda wrote about. And I see the slave mentality, that the whole concept of morality and the Abrahamic religions, bring into our culture. And that doesn't, Hinduism has the same problem in India. And so it requires really, in a sense, that much of an understanding just to get to some basic concepts. And then I try to take it all a step further after really, spending a lot of time with Thelemic concepts and Thelemic numbers and this and that. There's still a place to go with all that work. There is a speculative nature to the Qabalah. I think that's the best way to say it. And speculative metaphysics is the rule. And the Western mystery tradition has a philosophy, built off of, this speculative metaphysics that goes through our universities. So you have to begin to understand this path through our trying to engage with the spirit in our culture. And so we create Thelemic culture. And in 4 volumes, I delineate a lot of things. You could go online and just, you'll find all, I think, the introductions and indexes for all the 4 books. So, and some of them, probably all of them, you can find for free somewhere online. And read it, we always appreciate the sale because you get a hardcover book, or you can get an electronic book, and the funds go to our church, which is expensive. And so we consider every buyer of one of our books a member of the congregation.
Paul, I had a quick question. What do you think about the Abrahamic influences in the PGM? Because I know that played a huge influence in the formulation of Thelema. Do you try to
the acronym PGM?
Or the what are they called? The Greek Hermetic documents. Yeah, they were fragments found with Greek spells.
You broke up there a little bit. Say that again.
It's the ancient fragments found that have these Greek spells on them. It's the Greek magical papyri.
Oh yeah, I probably have electronic copies. I didn't know they put that all into a book, but I probably have electronic copies of it. Same problem with the Greek papyri that we have with all the medieval texts, all the medieval grimoires. They're all a distraction. They're there to weed out the gullible. And just get rid of them. And so you'll see all these online groups and whatever, and they're, I evoked the spirit of Taptharath last night, and we're part of the left-hand path. Hail Satan, Avi, whatever, Luigi. And this is all populist bullshit. The medieval grimoires are formulas that, think about it. If I got to those grimoires first, and somebody had to have written them, so somebody got to them long before me, but just if I got to them, and I'm going to be really frank and honest with you, okay? I'm going to live forever. I'm going to have the most, best body you ever saw. I'm going to have every beautiful girl on the surface of the earth. Sorry, guys. I'm going to have all the money. Okay, I'm going to own the only big cruise liner, and everybody else will be a part of my army. Okay, and nobody will ever be able to do magic. Because isn't that where it would take you? You know, so why isn't somebody there already? Why didn't they beat us to the punch? So whether you want to do Greco-Roman sigils and number spells and letter and number tablets and things like that, or you want to, draw the Solomonic seals and dance up and down in a rubber suit, doesn't, you know what I'm saying? See, you're not ready for the world.
Do you think a lot of that
Yeah,
ritual?
sorry.
Something I do want to ask you, Paul, real quick, because it's something that I've thought that a lot of that stuff actually isn't needed to have a magical experience.
Well, no. Now we can use those sigils very effectively when we understand that they're spirits that come from our own psyche. And when you go into the magic mirror and you evoke that spirit, you're evoking a part of yourself. And the idea is to bring balance to the personality. But now here's the problem. How do you know when your personality can even understand what balance is? Because you're not allowed in formal magic to do any of that work before you've had the knowledge and conversation. And that's a frighteningly profound experience. I don't care how different it is for everybody. And all these people that run around going, well, I've had the knowledge and conversation, my holy guardian angel forever and ever. And they've gotten, you wouldn't believe the number of contacts I get from various AA lineages trying to, beg for the alms of my envy or seek my approval that I'll validate their grade, because when we're in the same club, we pat each other on the back. You'll recognize me as Grand Poobah, and I'll be Vice Grand Poobah, or Grand Poobah of Vices, the way these things work.
Interesting. All right. So, what do you, since you have Thelemic and Greek Qabalah, I mean, is there any other things that like maybe you could touch on that makes Thelemic Qabalah Thelemic, I guess?
Well, everything's Qabalah. I think that's a wonderful place to start, right? Everything has come from symbols and sigils and images and thoughts and feelings and receptions. This is the Qabalah. We read right across the screen. Everybody's got their little name thing there, saying those are all symbols. That's a collection of symbols. And how we use them, because I could put together a string of choice words and all of you will say, oh, show's over now. Right?
I've said that before. Depending on what sound comes out of your mouth makes somebody think and feel differently.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's magic. That's Qabalah. Now, when we start to bring those numbers and letters into holy text, when we start to find a way to get holy text to bring out that which is within us, that very inner spirit that ultimately will become our angel. But through these holy texts, we begin to get contact with that. We begin to inspire ourselves forward. The Greek word inspire, taking in spirit, inspire. And through that inspiration, there is a spiritual ecstasy, and that's part of the experience of the angel too. But beware, because there's a trap there. There are plenty of astral junkies out there that are just tracing the rush of their next intense spiritual experience. So chances are all your early experiences, they're all going to feel like the end of the journey. You've arrived. You're one of us. And you really just found your way to the beginning. Okay, this is a deep, long path that I'm sorry for the younger among you there. You're not going to see it until you get older. But thank the gods that you guys are starting this thought now. Because when you get older, it's too late. And that's important because the Qabalah should produce ultimately from the master Kabbalist new gnosis. Without new gnosis, no magical lodge is worth its fruit. Without new gnosis, nobody has the authority to lead anything. If you're going to rely on the gnosis of dead masters, you're practicing necromancy.
Oh.
I got a sermon on that. Necromancy. It's not what you think.
That's interesting.
Paul, can you tell us where is your place and maybe tell us about it?
We live at 12 Factory Hill Road, and our church is at 8 Factory Hill Road in Hoosick Falls, New York. We're upstate New York, about 6 miles outside of the Bennington, Vermont border. I work and shop in Bennington. Do most of my shopping online. Bennington's closed. It's fucking the boondocks.
Yeah.
We've got 3 acres with the 2 buildings. We live in beauty. Our church has been attacked by the extreme radical Christianity that exists in this area called fundamentalism. But we sit in the woods where all the new American religions started, from Transcendentalism to Mormonism. Even Blavatsky came up here. Right. New York City, really, But so the hub of all of American intellectual culture, but specifically its unique churches, all the fundamentalist churches that are now the Bible Belt, started here. So you can get an idea of how much danger we're in. Actually, our building hasn't been attacked for some time, but, we're still finding like beer cans on my car when I go to work in the morning. There's issues. And they still talk about us in town, and people, I can't put my piano lesson cards up on the local billboards because, I am persona non grata. I used to teach in the school here. The kids started sending me death threats. We're in bizarre land for that. Now, that doesn't mean anybody that comes here is in any physical danger, coming to a service in broad daylight. But the night can be another story here.
Something
a quick question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The concept of using the dead master's knowledge. Wouldn't this, because you're talking about necromancy, and I find that super interesting, because isn't that all of religion itself? Like, aren't we, this is coming from a Pentecostal worldview, aren't we using dead people's knowledge, and that's what religion essentially is? And I mean, all of religion essentially.
That's the problem with all the dead religions. They're all worshiping dead masters, and they're worshiping his spiritual experience in lieu of having their own, because they're frightened of having their own. So they believe in the superstition that keeps them nice, so they don't have to spend too much money on police. You'll just obey the law. Even though your wife just did something really stupid and you want to slap her silly, you can't, because Jesus is watching, rather than the cop peeking in the window. And that's really what Christianity is. I mean, they even tell slaves to worship their masters. It's a sick document. Now, that doesn't mean we can't learn from many past masters. We can even take the fraudulent character of Jesus and learn an awful lot from it. But those lessons are not necessarily so obvious. And the misinterpretation that is bled into us from fundamentalist culture, let's put it this way. Thomas Jefferson said every American must learn to read. And the only book every American owned was a Bible. So you got all these people reading the Bible, not understanding, not having an educated approach to the Bible. And so now you got 100,000 fundamentalist sects. And they're already heretical, because even Calvin was a heretic. The only 3 Orthodox are the Catholic set of Orthodox churches with the Roman Catholic, and really the British Church and the Lutheran Church. Okay, the Episcopalians, still practice Catholicism. You won't see much difference in their mass. The same with what was the other group I said? Episcopalian. And the Lutherans. Okay, they just don't recognize the Pope. Okay, the Calvinists. There's a whole American history behind the Calvinists, and I could give you another half-hour lecture on that. So just let's say the Calvinists are heretics who got thrown out of Europe. They got here, and they thought they were going to build a city on the hill. Sound interesting to you Reagan fans? And they thought that Europe would invite them back and celebrate them as the new leaders who were able to create a perfect Christian nation. Instead, Europeans were glad to get rid of the dumb schmucks. And they turned around and they said, look at all these trees. And they are the moneyed class in America today. You want to rise in your career, you better be a WASP. Because that's what this world is run on. All 50 states, no matter the politics.
Mm-hmm. Something I wanted to ask you, and you kind of mentioned something just now that reminded me. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Paul, but it's just something I was going to ask you your opinion on anyway, because you mentioned all these people went to New York. Is your place on top of a mound by chance?
On top of a mound.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, we are on top of a mound. I always make a joke with global warming. When the water finally reaches New York, we got beachfront property.
Is there something up with that? Like, how you were mentioning, like a bunch of people.
Waterfalls near us.
You know how you mentioned, like, a bunch of people have seemed to have been there before? Like, I have wondered, like, when you have a lot of occultists going to the same spot, is there something to do with, like, a ley line or energy there that they've caught on to?
Oh, yeah, not that kind of a mound. I know what you're talking about. These mounds have been discovered. They're interesting. That's about the end of it. The rest of it's hyperbole to sell programs and get more advertising. Buy, spend. Charge it.
So, Paul, in regard to you talking about the aspect of the WASP culture and how it rose, when you look at them bringing the Scoville Bible in, and essentially, with all its bullet points, basically all relating back to Zionism and the idea of rebuilding the temple.
I'm still going to guess that is somehow a very interesting hoax. But let's just pretend for the sake of argument that it possibly is. You can't prove it one way or another. It's very interesting. There's a couple of things in places like this. They're very, very interesting. They certainly absorb our fascination. So they're worth talking about. Mm-hmm. It's the conspiracy theories on the one hand and the righteousness on the other that bothers me. Because the occultists can sit there and say, see, like, we've been here all along, man, you should be an occultist like this and come on into my satanic temple. And then, of course, the conspiracy theorists, secret Templars came here and to escape the papal run, and that's the first Masons that we ever had, and they were Indians from the Hubjiba tribe. It's like it goes every which direction. Just go down YouTube, start clicking on one, and there's 1,000 of them. And it's unfortunate because I've seen a lot of good YouTubers, realize that they can. They have a chance at making a run at getting monetized, and they start selling instead of producing their really interesting programs, they start selling out on all this. It gets a lot of attention. So it's populist stuff. And there's nothing wrong with populist stuff, but when you're somebody who wants real spiritual growth, you got to look at what you're putting in your head.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I don't watch TV commercials, because I'm still singing the fucking slogans from my childhood.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And all I can do is realize that they're there and put them out, and sometimes make a joke out of them or a joke with them, and realize that that's the counter Gnostic conditioning of our culture. You want that fancy car, you're trying to live to that lifestyle, you're just trying to get the White House with the picket fence. you're already trading some of your genius for security. And I can't tell you what kind of balance to keep there. But when you start spending 12 and 14 hours a day just keeping the house and the wife and the kids going, there's no spiritual advancement. Oh, kids are such a great thing, and you don't know what they can do. Because I didn't have my own kids, but my wife tells me this crap. She got 2 of them. But I say really bulldickies. Even if we look in the New Testament, Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead. Well, can we go back and bury our dead father? Yeah, and that's not the only scripture where you're going to hear that. That's just the one that comes to mind.
Paul, I had a quick question. So is there an echo? Sorry. I don't know if that's me. Okay. When we think about when I think about Christianity, and then I was raised Catholic, that I'm starting to come to the conclusion that most of what I have been taught about what Jesus said was filtered through Constantinople, as well as Council of Nicaea and so forth. And then when we look at some of the Gnostic texts with Mary Magdalene and what she claims that Jesus has said, it is quite the opposite. It is exactly what you're saying. It's about having an experience with yourself. It's about demanding more of yourself to advance a higher state of consciousness, if you will. I don't think they used the word consciousness back then, but would that be
that would be out of Plato and Aristotle? Yeah, certainly.
And so when you talked about how bringing in the Qabalah and how you write what Christianity got wrong, to me it makes complete sense why Qabalah was starting to be adopted by the Spanish in Christianity, the Greeks with their Orthodox, and then how it started to become pervasive by Plato and Empedocles and all these other things. You start to see emanations of its influence outward, as well as, in the alphanumerical systems within different, cultures, empires, and so forth. I guess my question is, do you think that is accurate in what the Gnostic texts indicate was being said by Mary Magdalene of what Jesus was saying?
I liked Mary Magdalene's text, and I thought maybe I should write a commentary to it. I've got on our gclvx.org website, I've got commentaries to a whole range of Gnostic texts, commenting on them really from a Thelemic perspective. And I've come to know a lot more since then of many different Gnostic texts, and Gnosticism is still just a catchphrase. There were some real groups like the Thomasines and the Magdalenes that were tied in more with the Greek temple structure, but Plato and Aristotle precede Gnosticism by a good period of time. And the Gnosticism that spread throughout the Roman Empire, including the Middle East, was multiform. I mean, the Docetics, would settle in the Arabic area. They couldn't stand the concept that, any god could be killed or nailed to a piece of wood. They would become Muslim. God is God. That's it. There's no God but God, right? The whole Muslim thing. La, la, the many logoi that were mixed in with Greco-Roman Egyptian culture, logoi being the plural for the word logos. Jesus wasn't the only logos, you know. Prometheus was a logos. Dionysus wasn't a logos. Bacchus, you know, Asclepius, the major logos that would, you know, in part become the Roman Catholic Church. All of his, he was the healer god that healed so good he raised the dead. The gods killed him for doing that, and then he was resurrected. They all get resurrected. They're all symbols of transformation. They're half human, half divine. Fathered by, you know, God. So it's always born of a woman, right? And that's parthenogenesis. That's the dove symbol. So this one sect that went on off of Paul, and all of Paul's letters in the Bible are not written by Paul. Some of them are written by others. Paul created a Roman version of the Jewish Gnostic movement. The Sethians were more the Gnostic movement of the Jews, and the Valentinians would borrow from that, and the Sethians would interact with the Valentinians at one point. But these the Sethians existed before the Valentinians. The Valentinians originated as a reaction to the Roman Church. They wanted an alternative vision, but they would not get the ear of Caesar, Constantine. Although they were, you know, they were kind of like sanctifying a couple of Caesars before that. But the Roman religion that would, you know, eventually splinter into, you know, Orthodoxy, that religion, what was I going to say about that? That religion was Paul's letters, built off of Paul's letters. It's a Pauline church. It's not a Petrine church. It didn't originate off of Peter and the ideas of Peter, which Peter would have been more about gnosis. Notice there's no Gospel of Peter in Catholic canon. Okay, now there are other Christian traditions whose canons are a little bit more expansive, like the Ethiopian canon. But be wary of, you know, competing ideas from the ancient world, and more interested in the fact that this was all literature, and this was, you know, for those that took it at any sacred level, it was about personal transformation.
Right.
You know, and, you know, for the masses, you know, the only religion that would work was the Roman religion. You need authority. Authority needs to keep their slaves, and the Roman religion is a slave religion. They keep their slaves, and they keep them docile, wanting to do good things and good deeds so they don't beat up their wives, right? And all that kind of stuff. I love that comedian. The New York guy is really, really funny. He comes out and he says, you know, there must be 19 reasons to beat your wife. And he said, but of course we can't do that. You know what I'm saying? But that doesn't mean the reasons still don't exist. And then he lists like 19. And it's really funny. But the real thing is that you need to keep the unthinking person to hold a certain line of civility. Without that, we would have no world where we could create a civilization, somebody to turn on the lights, and somebody to pick up the garbage, and somebody to design the auto parts. And you know what I'm saying? Every last facet of our society requires, you know, a very non-spiritual person to handle the very functional and important things for our civilization, because otherwise, as Plato says, without civilization, we'd still be slaves to nature. So we'd be out there hunting wood and getting away with beating our wives. I got to think about that for a minute. My wife's really, really sweet, and it wouldn't even cross my mind. So, but the fantasy is just so funny. The people would not behave if they didn't have Jesus watching them, if Allah wasn't watching them, if, you know, Jehovah wasn't watching them, if Krishna wasn't watching them. And all the standards of our society are built into that. All our rites of passage through life. The police force and the government officials, that all makes our world. And, we could call that the Black Lodge, which indeed it is, and its adepts are our power brokers in the world. But that doesn't make them evil. Black doesn't mean evil. Black just simply, it's the hats that the adepts of the nihilistic materialist lodge wear. And for them, it's a nihilistic materialism. The monists, the yellow school, which we find mostly in the East, all three schools exist everywhere, but the yellow school is monist in its character. And it says this world is an illusion, and your separateness is an illusion, and you need to achieve nirvana by losing your ego. And here's the problem. If this is all an illusion, what the hell are we doing here? I mean, why are we bothering to talk to each other? Why are we making culture? Let's all just get a gun, put it to the left temple, and achieve nirvana. We'll do the whole human race in one big swipe. We'll do it on video. Ready? You first.
That's why a part of me, when you think of religion, it is a brokered experience. And a part of me thinks about how much of all of this is just fake and gay. And it's just a way of wanting to put the masses into, right, how you're saying, the guy who's on the assembly line, who is following a religion just because his, the tradition was to always be Christian or something, pick whatever religion. He's not advancing spiritually because he has to work every single day, but he goes to church every Sunday and just takes in whatever they're regurgitating towards them, right? And the whole idea you're talking about.
There's one day a week he could do something. There's one day a week he could advance the cause. What a beautiful thing just to take Saturday or Sunday or Friday or whatever your work schedule is. That's going to be my day of contemplation and Kabbalistic work and meditation. And I'm going to try to think about.
That's blasphemous. Myself. That's heretical.
Yeah. So that's the time to read the holy books, because they take us out of ourselves. They take us out of our mundane personality for a little while. And for just that little while, we're inspired by those holy books and no longer an asshole.
Mm-hmm. And at the core of the 10 Commandments, it's don't be a piece of shit, right? I mean, just don't kill your neighbor. Don't lust.
It's more than don't kill your neighbor, right? Be meek. You should love God more than them, but you should be humble before them, right? You should love God more than your family. Walk away from your wife and kids. If you really loved God, that's what that religion teaches you, right? So, and if you're a slave to the homeowner, you should, respect and love your master, because there's two of the Gospels recommend that fluidly. So the whole mentality built into Christianity that is developed, and then, of course, nurtured by the church and defined by the church, kind of the way the Supreme Court, reinterprets the Constitution. The church reinterprets the Bible and creates doctrine off of that. And the doctrine is always to keep you servile. And for 90% of the world, 99% of the world, that's perfect. They're doing a good job. And they're good people. There's bad people among them too. You got to go down, Barry. That's it. But, because people are people, right? So when it comes to the yellow and the black school, I got real issues, me personally. I'm of the white school. We are of the dualist camp. And as dualists, we recognize the separation between body and mind, that the mind itself is the soul. And it interacts with the brain. And there's a whole conversation on how the mind interacts with the body, but the body does what I say the second I say it, right? So I can move this hand, I can train these fingers, right? And bob my head, whatever I want to do. And yet there's also very unconscious things that the mind also does. I have unconscious expressions. And so in the dualist camp, the material world is still real. You know, I'm not spirit trapped in matter. I'm spirit liberated in matter. I have a place here to be creative and to bring that which is within, Gospel of Thomas, and bring it out and put it in the world. That's why in magic you produce new gnosis. Everybody else is just stroking their ego, looking for the alms of envy.
Now, in regard to producing new gnosis, you know, you go back to Plato and divine madness, you go into ecstatic Qabalah, and you look at the past and the mystery schools in regard to the introduction through these series of, you know, initiations that bring you heightened levels of understanding and consciousness, versus when we set up the dichotomy of this exterior force that we put our energy into instead of knowing thyself.
The old initiation rites, I think, were probably great. They worked in their time. They spoke to their culture. And for us, these are pseudo gods that we were, you know, conditioned into not believing. Right. I know one great atheist debater who says, you know, everybody's an atheist except for one God, because there's thousands of them. And that superstitious, you know, conditioning still existed in the pagan world. And people joined these mystery cults to go through and have these ecstatic experiences. They were parts of, you know, the air, you know, the people in the area of a temple. You know, not only did it provide spiritual, but also material contribution to the surrounding community. The farmers, you know, had a place and a way to sell their wheat, and, you know, and money was brought in, you know, and so for those that wanted to have that spiritual experience, it was open. There was no control over or any sort of thing really of religious authority, except really possibly with the Jews. And the Jews were allowed to practice their religion. Rome didn't really care. The problem was that as there was a faction of the Jews that became violent.
And rebellious. Yeah.
Out. Okay, and they had a rebellion. So in part, the motivation for the Roman pontiff was to create a sedate version of Jesus, because the Jewish Messiah was a general. He was going to chase him out with, you know, weapons of war.
Right.
God was going to come down off the clouds with lightning bolts, you know. And so they would take this pagan transformative experience in these mystery temples and build that into this logos, because the logos mystery temples were all about that, you know, getting to the point of sickness or death and, you know, whatever. And of course, there was ecstasy in that experience. There was spiritual ecstasy that became the awakener of one's spiritual self, that they would have this profound spiritual experience and start the world. Just like, you know, really in its own mock way, we in our modern religions, you know, all have rites of passage, right? You have that adult rite, whether it's First Holy Communion, confirmation, or whether it's baptism. You know, the bar mitzvah, right? So there's all sorts of, you know, rites of coming of age. Marriage is a very big one. The community must approve of the marriage.
The sacraments.
Right? Yeah, the seven sacraments then connected them with the spirit of the church, right? That's what Holy Communion is all about. The the nice discipline, had the confessional. So you could go out and sin all week, and if you were truly penitent, you would, say your 10 Hail Marys, and you'd be able to take the Eucharist tomorrow and be cleansed of your sins. Right? And the whole concept of sin, well, this goes back long before Christianity and Greco-Roman culture. I mean, it was always about sin, right? There's a plague on our land, and we must have offended, the god of corn, right? And so superstitious ideas intertwined with popular culture, each in its age. And that's not to say there wasn't great wisdom there as well. I think that these early city-states, generated a series of shamans that were able to hear the voices in our head. But they were hearing them really for the first time back then. We were still grunting and knuckle-dragging before that. Okay, and these voices came to be the gods, and whoever was the best at relating the voices in their head got to be the shaman, the king, the high priest, and this all built into eventually what would become our first empires. And soon enough, the pharaoh was the one who was going to go to heaven when he died, right? But he would bring the entire country with him if he made it to the afterlife. So you have these leaders that, through them, we get to the Father, not through ourselves. And so Gnostics have risen in every place in every age to say, no, it's through ourselves. They're lying to you.
Right.
But the problem is they get caught up, kind of like the Democrats, always worried about the boogeyman, and they got nothing to say for themselves. Put a little politics there, but it really plays out. Our politics plays out in our culture.
Oh, yeah. The left and the right.
The left and the right, the good and the bad, right? The right and the wrong, the happy and the sad, the haves and the have-nots, right?
And I was going to add on to what you've been saying too, with the idea of monotheism not exactly being the way of one God, but more specifically the way of perceiving God in one way, right? And so it institutes
it's a God out there.
Sure. I was just going to say that idea where it institutes a certain certainty and adamant mindset to where one is correct and everyone else is wrong. So it can kind of proceed in a dialectic of obedience.
Yeah. Didn't you have that argument with your friends in the backyard in the summertime? My dad's bigger than your dad. It's human behavior.
Yeah, sure.
It's human behavior, right?
Yeah.
So now my God's better than your God. My God's the true God. We'll fight it out because the true God will.
And even when they say it's that they're talking about the same God, it's my way of perceiving God is the right one. Yeah, really.
We always got to see through the pastor's way, through the rabbi's way. They're the official interpreters of Scripture. They're the clerics that maintain the traditions of the religion, or the religion dies. Now, again, most people aren't going to be able to rise above this. This keeps them docile.
Right. Okay? Maybe that's not bad in the circumstance.
Yep. We need them at work right now, as a matter of fact, right? Or we wouldn't be doing this. Right?
There's also I was going to add to.
Sorry, go ahead, Ethan.
I was going to say, about the idea of walking the same path as these teachers of the past, or what one might be better off doing is walking your own path as they did, right? Because people even will go to the very literal physical paths that some other travelers have done, but they don't do it the same.
Crowley said, don't follow me, cut your own way through the jungle. And it's a jungle. It's tough to figure out. Right. I'm sorry. I don't care where you are, where you're at. You're going to have a tough time at it. And that's never going to go away. You know what I'm saying? Because it shouldn't. what should happen is that you begin to collect your successes and you add them in, and you begin to get to where your true career, quote unquote, where your true career is in life.
And you learn to accept your losses more gracefully as you move, and the successes become points to get you to look to higher places as well.
I think they still hurt, man. They really do. I'm capable of making a real first-class jackass out of myself. So, so we all have those parts of our psyche where we get touched. I hate to be embarrassed. Don't embarrass me, okay? I won't hide in the shell. It won't go away, but it hurts real bad because it goes back to childhood and it plays to my conditioning. But in my Gnostic process, I accept that, and I want to remember all the terrible things that happened to me as much as I want to count my blessings and treasure my joys.
Right.
And the you can picture that as point and counterpoint. The transcendent point then is how I rose above both and came to a new understanding, which then becomes its own point, needs a new counterpoint,
Right.
and then I've got to get to a new transcendent point.
Progressively, yes.
So the process never stops. There's no rest. If you're really serious about this path, there's never a place where you're going to get to say, I got it. I know it all. It's down. Put the file away, dear. Turn on the TV.
So if it's about paving your own way and coming up with your own system, I forgot who it was because Nick mentioned earlier that you can, engage your own spiritual experience type of thing. I forgot who it was. It was either Idris Shah or Franz Bardon. I can't remember who it was that talked about like setting up your own temple.
Because Franz Bardon had very specific program thing. He was really a Rosicrucian. But there is something to say for, finding your own way. And there's something to say for following the directions. Okay. I think both are necessary. But when I say follow the directions, I'm not saying follow the way of these, idiot slave gods. Okay. I think Thelema offers a direction. And whether or not I think Thelema is kind of the top, holds the top tier on that, no matter what direction you choose, no matter what discipline you engage or how you approach it, Eastern or Western, I'm a Western mind, so I approach it from a Western perspective. But there are Western minds that really do well with Eastern ideas and can hold on to their cigarettes. You're not interested. Don't be interested. So there is something to say for following my new doggy's interest. I'm sorry, guys. I couldn't leave it on the floor. She'll eat it. So there's general things that I think everybody will go through, both physically and mentally, in the quest of how they do it, whether they come from some yoga or whether they dance or do Western art. There's all sorts of ways that, being a musician, I could tell you all the time about musicians who have these, immense spiritual experiences. I hear all the time. I jogged for just a little while at the gym, the running machine. But and I was getting pretty good. But I do know well the world of these joggers that jog through your neighborhood every morning. Some of these guys enter real altered states, not the ones with the headphones on. They've lost their chance to it. They're drowning it out. You got to start listening to your thoughts, and then you got to get past them as you focus on your breath. So whether you're jogging Central Park or you're sitting in a yoga asana and listening to the breath and controlling its meter, that you finally get to a point where you control the mind. The asana is a control of the body. You can take that into hatha yoga and get to all sorts of, exotic control over the body. The only reason why I would, kind of poo-poo that for a little bit is it's real great when you're young. But when the body starts falling apart, if your spiritual experience is on that, the pretty girl is going to stop being looked at one day, and life changes. So if you've built all your life walking down the street as the pretty girl, then when they stop looking at you, your life's not worth living. The street isn't worth going. So we do disconnect from our bodies with age. And in that disconnection, a lot of things fall away from us. And everything with vigor that's attached to spirituality, tantra and what have you, all of that, I think, is good for the young that want to pursue it. But if you're building your spiritual experience off of that, I would counter advise. But that may be the right way for you. So really, what's my advice worth?
It was Techniques of High Magic, a Manual of Self-Initiation by Francis King and Stephen Skinner is what I was thinking of, where they talk about setting up your own temple and making your own magical instruments. But none of that is necessary,
Yeah, I think there was another Golden Dawn who did it, but I remember that book. And it is everything right about that. But of course, he's giving you the directions, right? You're just not going to a Golden Dawn temple, but you're building all of its symbols, right? The thing about the magical temple is that all the symbols in there are designed to access part of your psyche. And when you get done building the full temple space, the temple itself becomes a transformative experience just to open the door and step into it. You'll probably robe outside, you'll put on your magical ring, your magical pendants, whatever you got, whatever you're making a part of that ceremony.
Magical underwear.
Yeah, don't forget the magical underwear, you know what I'm saying? But, it didn't do anything for my love life. I got to tell you that right now. Sometimes they ran home running. What?
So I'd be interested to get your thoughts on like the Typhonian OTO and the whole like Lovecraftian aspect. So were they onto something? Were they doing something right by adapting that system, or was it all bullshit too?
Well, in my opinion, it was all bullshit, but that doesn't mean it wasn't meaningful for the people involved. Okay. I was attracted a little bit to them and curious. Even probation did stalely failed me. Okay. Only because I rather than doing one ritual every day for a year, I did 4 rituals every day. I did Liber Resh at the 4 angles of the sun. And sometimes I had to do it when driving home from work. And since I did, I failed. So you already see a tyranny of structure going on there, and not really somebody that's recognizing, because I was at least a zealoter at the time, maybe even a practicus. So I had established credentials far beyond already what anything you would really be doing in the Typhonian Temple. And the Typhonian Temple, pretended to have this secret of sex magic. But I think besides Kenneth Grant and his wife, there wasn't that much really going on. I mean, I have this problem with the Wiccans too. The polyamory bullshit. When you get caught up in these circles, they explode. Guaranteed net result, no matter how long it lasts in between. And it generally doesn't last too long. Okay. And I saw it completely destroy a student of mine and I loved her dearly. She just went down that road. I said, have you really thought about this? And she didn't deal with her issues of an abusive husband.
Huh.
So, again, I think Kenneth Grant was the adept. I think he generated new gnosis, and there's a lot of valuable stuff in his material.
Mm-hmm.
What then happened with some of his experiments, and where Staley and what's that other guy came along? Forget his name, but those two really built this whole shock idea into initiation. Like Devo wanted to do a concert in Central Park where they instructed all their audience to wear diapers. They were going to hit the pitch that makes us shit in our pants. And eventually the New York Parks and Recreation Department canceled the idea.
But they wear diapers for the ball drop. What's the difference?
Well, they wear diapers for the ball drop, but they're getting through the day there. They're there 15, 18, sometimes 24 hours. Okay. Whereas you go to a rock concert in Central Park, it used to be the Schaefer Music Festival, and you're already waiting for general admission tickets, and you're online all day. And then Devo's going to play the one tone. There's a tone. There's a musical tone that you play on the
brown note
that will make you.
Has that been scientifically proven?
Oh, yeah.
Has it been scientifically proven, the brown note?
The brown note, yeah.
I don't know anything about it. I never inquired into it. I went to a psychic TV concert.
Oh, yeah.
One time, and this was in the early 80s. And what's his name was the leader of that eventually became a girl.
Right.
Yeah, but he became the OTO darling. Okay. And the concert I went to was a screen recording of his surgery, getting his cock fit with a cock ring. Okay. And on the sides of the screen were two giant round tom-tom drums, and one hammering on each one at the same time for like 2 hours. Dump, dump. And you're a man standing there really having every sort of penile fear and pain that you could ever imagine. Getting kicked in the balls is nothing. And I'm trying to endure this work of art. I finally couldn't take it anymore. And just as I sat down on the side wall seat, they stopped. I was so fucking happy. And in the end, I walked out of it going, that really wasn't art at all. That was designed to arouse physical trauma in the male. Okay, and unnecessary physical trauma, like Lovecraft, unnecessary psychic trauma, that really is just an exercise in stupidity,
futility.
If you enjoy fear, that's fine. But I've lived in Newark, I've lived in Harlem. I don't really ever want to pay for fear. I've never even watched Jaws, the father of it all. Our Lord Jesus.
You were initiated to the mysteries of the cock ring that day.
Yeah, there we go. Maybe that's what killed off my love life. Let me see. I'll have to think about that one too.
A certain type of gnosis.
Yeah.
True fear.
I found the brown note is supposed to be between 4 and 8 hertz, because that's the resonant frequency of the abdominal cavity. So if you're trying that point,
4 hertz, I don't think we can hear 4 hertz. So if it has an act, that doesn't mean it doesn't act on the body, but the ears may not pick it up.
Right.
Well, I mean, if they allegedly use directed energy weapons to sodomize people, if they would be able to play a note that'd make you shit your pants, I mean, I could believe that. I'm sure that the government has some Secret
it's a
technology.
it's a
Well,
micro.
that reminds me. There's a story about Tesla who had a vibrating chair, and he really liked Mark Twain, and invited him over and had him sit in this chair at the vibration level that would give him diarrhea if the story is
How
true.
did Mark Twain get mixed in with that?
He was
Mark
fascinated by
Twain
his work.
and Tesla, they were fascinated by each other, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't
Yeah.
know. Oh yeah, well, Tesla would have been in this area too. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Tesla. I think at the time he was not in Colorado. He was. Sorry.
Was it Mark Twain, like Illinois or something like that?
I think at the time the visit took place in upstate New York, if it did indeed happen.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out too that you're actually quite Eastern minded in your ideas that are syncretic, but also in the idea mainly that there's the way of no way, right? That there's that's what I'm saying. So
Taoism is a white school experience. Okay, so
I was going to say in Tai Chi practice, one way to refine the kind of perspective on the way of no way is that people or one can do the same movement differently. And in the beginning, it's hard for a beginner to get it because it's always slightly different, or the move might be
trained just for a little bit in what they call it, soft hands.
Cool. Yeah. Push hands. Yes.
Push hands.
And that is embodying that idea.
I trained for a little Castaneda system.
Cool.
Which would kind of mimic that whole thing. And it was all about body memory.
Right.
That's what it all is, right? Now I was
just going to say, to refine off the idea that the principles are what's more important rather than the actual specifics might be different, right? So these principles.
Wait a minute.
Please.
I don't know that the principles at their root are really all that different. I used to have a piano.
I don't mean that. I just mean that they're more kind of the basis and paramount, and then it can be done your own way.
Well, yeah, but of course, now here's where instruction really counts. Some of these masters have managed to do very unique things with the body and developed all sorts of strengths and talents. And I think there is something of value in it. Of course, there's the Hindu story of the guy who stood on one foot with his finger in his ear and was able to live for 1,000 years. But, what kind of living was he doing? Right. But, you know what I'm saying?
No, I don't mean to say that there's a Tai Chi practice that one should adopt immediately. I mean to say that your idea of doing it your own way is totally.
I want to get back to movement for a second.
Please.
It's the body movement of like Tai Chi or Castaneda's thing, or even more basic yoga, or even fancy yoga poses and all that, and mudras. With all of that, I used to have this adult piano student. He was a New York State trooper. He died last year. Owned his own martial arts academy. He was a sensei. And as I was teaching him to move his fingers, I used the language of these Eastern arts. And I said, well, listen, you train your body and you learn certain moves and you do them in a certain order. And you then repeat those moves and you repeat those moves until you can do them with perfection. And then you engage in a competition. And, you learn to improvise on those moves because you don't know what your opponent is going to bring at you. Well, that's playing the piano. I'm just doing it with 10 fingers, not 4 limbs and a head. Right? And yet that movement creates the feeling of art in the Western mind. And I have to imagine the Eastern mind, somebody playing, an Eastern instrument, etc. That, moods and connections with the inner divine are made through this. So that mine might be at the piano and somebody else might be doing Tai Chi. I think both can bring you to the same place. What we then need to do is add in our Qabalah and holy books, because that gives us direction, that gives us spirit, and that's our comeuppance. So that any powerful spiritual holy book should come to live inside of you. In the AA, everybody has to memorize a chapter of each of the multi-chapter holy books and then the whole of the single chapter holy books as they go through the grades. And at each stage, that book comes alive in you, that chapter. And it kind of details your character to some degree. And it helps you to get to know thyself, the Hermetic axiom. But you're creating an uplifted self. The first one is Liber 65. It's about the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. We tell the probationer, this is your first contact with your angel. The chapter you chose, because we don't necessarily tell them until after they chose a chapter. The chapter you chose tells us something about the nature of your soul. The one you're creating, not the one you have. You weren't born under a good sign. So sorry. You're studying spirituality. You got kicked around in the world somehow, or world, at home, at school, wherever it is. You got kicked around, or you would still be at church going, God bless me, Jesus. Or killing and dying for God, whichever kind of personality you got. We all do it. Let's go kill for Jesus. Allah. We kill for Allah. Jehovah, we conquer all of Palestine. And it is the way of the world. It's the power structure. If you don't like it, you don't understand the world. You need to deepen your Gnostic experience. If there's anything that you think is wrong with the world, because there's nothing wrong with it, it's absolutely perfect as it is right now. It's the amalgam of all of our thoughts, and it's humanity coming to consciousness. We're learning how to think. Ignore that monist college that wants us to escape. You got to come here and think. Thinking is the next evolutionary step.
The next frontier.
Think, grow.
I think what happens also, Paul, is that like most of the people with their respective religions and beliefs is they do get hung up, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode with people who have passed on, is that we worship them as they are the end all be all. And really, honestly, they're just the people in the Hall of Fame. Really, they are the ones that got the closest than anyone else has.
Now, here's Lou Gehrig in the Hall of Fame. And here I am, Johnny Little Schoolboy, that wants to grow up and become Lou Gehrig. But in the end, I'm the one that has to learn how to swing the bat, play the field, throw the pitch, catch it, right? And so Lou Gehrig may be a model, an idol. Maybe Lou Gehrig taught me how to hit a little bit. I copied his stance. I watched how he played the field. And so there's so much value to get from, all these different approaches. And the fact that somebody can hand down some parts of a tradition is rich. But in the end, just like when your head hits the pillow at night, you're all alone in that moment. And in the end, that's the one you got to live with. I've always been an idea man. Through all my depressions in my younger years, through my whole foray into drugs and ridiculousness and my obnoxious college career, and I was super New York City kind of asshole. I'm still an asshole, but just a more mature asshole now.
An enlightened asshole.
Yeah, an enlightened. That's what I like. You know what I'm saying? We're back to 4 degrees or something. Now I'm producing ideas like mad. I mean, I just put up a new video that I think is my best today. And I got a new idea for a next set of sermons. I'm doing on William James. So I'm trying to ramp up for that so I can write a whole bunch of sermons real quick. And the ideas keep coming in my head. I got 4 books on my desk that I'm trying to write, and another 4-volume set that I've been writing for years and just can't seem to get back to. But I'm saying whenever I get done writing all this other shit, I'm going to do that. I swear. I promise. I swear. And I'm in absolute heaven. I'm fully aware of the traumatic life that I lived, and it was no easy ride for me. I don't have to sit here and sing you that song. I never learned violin. But I've had my pain. I've read my early diaries. I was a fucking lunatic. All of that shaped me. All of that colored my opinion of the world. And all the inspiration that I had in each age, writing the songs when I was, in my heavy music period. I was in 3 different rock bands that were pretty serious bands. You'll be cool. You don't play with that. And I came to finally see that I had been doing it all along from childhood. Always generating ideas. We wrote plays as kids. And we staged them, We'd have beauty contests. We'd invite all our sisters and stuff like that. And me and my buddy Wayne would bake a cake, and then, and we'd, build a stage, and we'd have the whole little event. But I mean, it was a kid thing, but we organized the neighborhood. I had my lemonade stand in front of the house. I even did a junk sale, and I ended up spending a couple of days buying and reselling too. I had a guy that was wholesaling to me. I made a few bucks. Eventually, the internet opened up, and I was able to become a writer. And I got a large body of work that I love and treasure, and I hope the world will find it. I sell a few books, beer money, and I drink beer though, so I keep it. Now it helps the church. It's what it's all about. And I don't know if I've brought myself into the world. I can't claim that adeptship, and I might not live to see it, and it yet might happen. Right? Eventually, I'll reach the world. My books will be discovered. Every artist is discovered, 3 days after he's dead. So, you need 3 days to resurrect. Or 3 days for a good binge. But I don't do coke anymore. Your mic's off, Ethan.
Yeah,
Thanks for noticing. Thank you. One thing I wanted to ask, and I appreciate how you present things, and that I find, and how you were saying how some things are kind of superfluous in the beginning. But I find that this idea I am admittedly obsessed with, but it is also a very syncretic idea in itself, and yet is presented in the Qabalah really beautifully in the idea of the 4 worlds. Would you explore the idea of the 4 worlds and its syncretic related and just?
Well, I would say the Qabalah in general first is syncretic in its nature. It's an amalgam, a compendium of the entire Western mystery tradition. It's not just its details of the tree of life and the 4 worlds. Now, of the 4 worlds, well, we have the tree of life laid through those 4 worlds. Okay. So what we're seeing is the descent of the divine light into the Adam Kadmon, who secretly hides the Shekinah, and then the Shekinah ultimately descends to Malkut, and it's God's blessing on his people. This is really Jewish Kabbalah, I would say, not Thelemic Kabbalah. But yet the Shekinah then becomes Babylon in the Kabbalah, and she's the one who sits on the throne of the queen to awaken the eld of the king. So in these four worlds, we start at the highest spiritual level, absolute. We get to that psychic in-between world, that astral in-between world that really floats between time and not time. And we'll call that Bria. It's the formative world. The real astral world that everyone partakes with, that are the parts of the soul, the Ruach, that's in Yetzirah. And then finally, the lowest of the world is the material manifestation of the Godhead that started up at Kether up top in the highest world. So we're each God. And we're each that same God. We're each the one God. The one became the all. There is no one anymore. The one is none. Okay, so when they say that, we're all one, I just say, give me your bank account. We just start with the number. I can do the rest. Okay, we're all one. And if this world is an illusion, I want you first to say that while your hand's in a hot frying pan. But if you're not willing to do that, well, just take a razor blade and slice your face so that you're all but ugly, and see how your opportunities for life disappear. Okay, so there's something very real about this world, and there's something very real about our perceptions of this world. And we each have our own unique perceptions of this world. So what's right for me might not be right for you, and vice versa, right? Or they may be right, and we'll form a club, and we'll initiate each other, pat each other in the back, and you'll be the big poopa, and I'll be assistant vice president poopa. Yeah. So the four worlds are a description of the involution of the divine into the manifestation of the divine in the material world. It's at the opposite end. So there's spirit and matter. And in between, the Ruach is soul. But you got to make that. If the world's telling you what to be, how to be, who to be, why to be, then you ain't making it.
I identify as a toaster.
Guys, thanks for playing.
I identify as a toaster, though. Does that mean I'm enlightened? Have I passed on?
See, we're going to go. You're going to get me started on the problem of trans, aren't you? Okay? You have to sit there and let it happen. But these are people mutilating themselves and each other. And it is an illness to think you were born in the wrong body, and an even worse illness to think that you could change the body. It doesn't work. Okay? The guy becoming a woman will never menstruate. He doesn't know about a woman's fear of menstruation at this, in her early age. She can't go in the swimming pool in the summer. She's, all these things that go with puberty. The guy who's completely unsure of himself, and every time the teacher says you got an A in this one, he comes in his pants, he's afraid people are going to notice. Well, that's a girl becoming a guy is never going to know that. And from the moment of the surgery, they will never, ever experience orgasm again. So they are lost. They've lost their central connection with spirit.
That's wild.
Okay.
They don't live the question.
They don't live the question. They don't. They're trying to be toasters. You know what I'm saying? I can trade in my 2-slice toaster for a 4-slice toaster, or maybe a toaster oven, right? And then they can put it in the oven. The disgusting things that these trans people have to do every single day to maintain themselves, and the amount of drugs they got to sell. It was in the DSM for how many years as a mental disease, and now it's gender affirmative care. And we all have to change our pronouns. Well, my pronoun is Oompa Loompa, just for your information. You can't change the language. You can't change the pronouns. The universe works in yin and yang. It's the spiritual truth. This trans shows you that we've moved to a heightened, exaggerated state on the nadir of materialism, on the nadir of consumerism. They're buying this. Parents are being told, if you don't put your child through this, she's going to kill herself or he's going to kill himself. Bullshit. Everybody in puberty really doubts themselves for a little while.
Me and Robby, we're interested in the Kybalian worship of like ancient Rome.
Qibali.
Yeah, the
I've
Qibali
been following that quite extensively. Yeah.
and Addis worship, where they would castrate themselves as a public ritual. And there's so many different parallels between what was going on back then, the declining Roman Empire.
But those are parallels. They were castrating and destroying themselves for the sake of religious ecstasy. Both in the East and the West, there are movements that are very much against any form of sexuality. Okay, any form of sexuality, any form of semen surrender, in one branch, right? So that, and that's why your Roman priest is going to tell you, like he told me in puberty, that every time I jerked off, I killed 10,000 babies.
Damn.
Okay, and so you realize that you're a mess sitting there in church as a devout Roman Catholic, and finally I chose masturbation at first, and then I learned a few other tricks. I'll buy you some.
Magical masturbation. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah, well, you still got to say the magical ritual, right? You got to prepare, you got to dress, get yourself a decent job, some decent clothes, a nice apartment, good music, because she's got to see that you're a together kind of guy, right? And then you got to learn how to say, "Can I see you next week?"
Well, I think one of the things that stands out to me with the Qibali worship was it was usually slaves that would participate in the self-castration, because for them, moving up the ladder meant becoming a high priest of this Addis worship. And the way they would do it is through the public ritual. And then what we have today is the way these parents...
out of human slavery.
Right. Well, the way these parents want to elevate themselves...
Prize. You might get me to cut my balls off, too, to get out of Roman slavery.
It was
and under Qibali, when they would go through the levels of initiation, and finally on what they called the Day of Blood, when they would actually sever the member, they knew they were entering into the cult as a slave of the goddess, but the goddess would hold her hands out in protection of the galley or the various names.
That person became a cleric.
Right.
Administering to the priestesses of the temple.
Yes.
Right. Now, why were the sacred whores in those temples? They were the priestesses. Mm-hmm. When a Roman soldier came home from the battlefield, and they saw a lot of battlefield, they had to get rid of the PTSD. They had to get rid of the gross materialism. And the priestess, by eloping with the priest, bestowed this soldier's social soul, that he was able to move back into society. So her function was quite regal. She prophesied, she did other things, what I'm saying? But their goddesses were loved as much as their gods. And their cults were Great. This bastard child called trans has nothing to do with any of it. And I've gotten all the literature on the pretense of going back to that old stuff. But, you know, they weren't trans. There were no trans writers in any age, okay? Queer, what the fuck is that? A man with a beard wearing a dress? You know what I'm saying? And, you know, that's the only one that probably shouldn't have a job at the front counter. The rest of them, we don't know. They don't have to come in and tell us what they are. Well, I'm heterosexual. I want a job here. My pronoun is he.
Well, I was going to say there was an aspect within the Kybalion Addis manifestation that they were actually working themselves into, like you said, an ecstatic state. But then they would also become married to the goddess herself in that androgyne form, and then they could become apotheosized, and the goddess would basically apotheosize them as a sort of a middleman savior, very much like Mithra or Jesus or
and that's an extreme form of right-handed tantra, right? They sit on the right hand of the naked girl and they don't touch her. Right, that's right-handed tantra. Right.
I wanted to mention there was a cult in Russia that was into the castration thing and removal of limbs to prove. I don't know if Headless and Robby, if you knew about it. I believe it. I just looked it up. It's the Skopsky cult, and they would remove limbs to prove their worship of God,
dedication to the sacred
to prove their dedication.
The gods that so believed in Jesus, they allowed themselves to be crucified later.
Right.
Andrew died of martyrs. You know. So you look at all those martyrs, and it became a way to spiritually prove yourself. It was a guarantee into heaven. Right? If you died a martyr as a Muslim on the field, you know, you get 72 virgins. I don't know what happens to them next. But, you know, they're not worried.
There was also the idea of the suffering of the flesh cleanses the soul. And you see this in various forms through miscellaneous cultures worldwide.
So in Islam, you don't drink. You don't take in any inebriant. Right? So you're sacrificing. You drink your wine in heaven. So heaven is an earthly material place. It's just the perfect place. And this is the problem with Plato and Aristotle, the subject of the video I just put up today. Plato creates this world of ideal forms. That would be ultimately, to make a long story short, bastardized into heaven. And it was the perfect world that Aristotle would say this world as the imperfect world is just as real, but it's evil because it's imperfect and constantly changing. Hermetic axiom, change equals stability. So you see that this idea creates the idea of original sin, heaven and hell. This stuff develops centuries later in Christianity. Hell didn't exist until something like 700 AD.
I think that part of the Gnostic texts of Mary Magdalene, and that she was claiming that Jesus had said that sin is more of a disease of the soul because you are not allowing the soul to become, you're not allowing the soul to be who the soul was intended to be, and exploring those moments for the soul to kind of reveal itself, reveal its purpose, and then walk in that purpose. And that by you not doing those things, that you are causing dis-ease or disease of the soul itself. I believe that's what was in the Gnostic of Mary Magdalene.
It's a beautiful thought, and I've heard that said, you know, outside of Magdalene's text. It's the word sin I have a problem with. Its major definition and primordial definition is that it is making a God not happy. And that God is the ultimate voyeur. He watches everything you do in all of your most private moments. And he knows your every thought. And he's a he.
Not just that, Paul, But if you go back to Exodus, the way that they describe the God of the Bible or Yahweh is like a cloud by day, and then it would live in a box by night. I mean, we've all got clouds in a box, right? I mean, the idea of this interdimensional AI thing, right? Because he makes the chest plate of the priests light up.
Right.
And so he's feeding people this information, sort of like an alternate dimension.
A divining board.
Remember
Right.
the Ark of the Covenant, they were just imitating the Egyptian gods.
Right.
Okay, every god had his own ark, and it was carried ceremoniously, just like the Ark of the Covenant. Now, those miraculous things have been ascribed to the Ark of the Covenant. And somebody walked up and touched it and died instantly.
Right.
And there's all sorts of theories of static electricity. Somehow they had an electric engine going in all of this. All of that story. Okay, I used to play for the Knicks and the Yankees, in the off season, and now I'm just here to mingle with the little people. Okay, good story. If you buy it, thank you very much. I still won't write you a check.
I do have a friend who has kind of built an orgone box out of the dimensions of the Ark, and he has done some wild stuff with that shit.
I think there's a lot very interesting about the orgone box. A former church member of ours actually visited his property. I'm trying to think of his name. The orgone box. Who's the guy that invented the orgone box?
Wilhelm, right?
Wilhelm Reich.
Wilhelm Reich.
Yeah.
You got to read his 2-book series on the orgasm. It's the ultimate in psychological reading and understanding the body.
We live in a cosmic Hydos Gamos, the sacred love between the earth and the sky. That's basically what he's saying, right?
Well, yeah, and he's trying to play with the chi, natural forces. And he's trying to technologize that, a la Tesla, right? And I think it's fascinating. It's interesting. I'm not going to build one. I did a lot of other things. I'm saying, without a direct experience of it after that, I can only say it's a brilliantly interesting theory. You got to come up here. I know. You got to come up here.
The guy that Nick had on included radioactive material with his orgone and created an alternative energy source that would create paranormal events in his house.
We're back to my former career with the Knicks and the Yankees.
Who was that?
Leon Southgate. Leon Southgate.
They can say anything and everything about this stuff. And, it's back to my whole analogy of, if I had all the grimoires in my head, what I'm saying, I'd have my 42 virgins on Earth. Right?
I'd have the biggest dick, man.
I'd
have the biggest dick ever. You wouldn't even know.
There you go. Well, you wouldn't be able to use it. It would, be a limp biscuit.
I'd beat people with it.
Throw it over his shoulder.
There you go. That's it. Throw it over his shoulder and he's going to give me a wrestling match.
I just think it's kind of like if you actually manifest ghosts, that's kind of like knocking on walls and stuff.
It's so sensitive when he uses his washing machine.
I can't go for any of this stuff. I've watched the Wiccans do their ghost hunts with their, super secret plasma mirrors, and it's all an exotic joke. That doesn't mean that there aren't some poltergeists and there aren't some ghosts that walk around here and there, but that's not really making the headlines because it's not really exciting. Good campfire stuff, though. We used to tell scary stories at the campfire. We were scared shitless going back to our tents. Oh, the men loved to do it to us. That's what you get in Boy Scouts.
Do you not ascribe any kind of metaphysical meaning behind stuff like the Nine? Feeling that talked about the Star Trek and all these sort of futurist type of ideas?
I had even a full writing career long before the internet existed. And the interesting thing in those days was you had to get an editor to approve your story, to find it interesting and of quality for the magazine. that, fulfilled that function and made the magazine richer. Now the internet, 10,000 dumb ideas get the same amount of attention as one good idea. And the one good idea is generally lost and can't be found. And the ideas that remain are the 10,000 shitty ideas. And that noise is so friggin' loud. I'm debating some intelligent guys at work, because all they do is, I said, where do you get your news from? We're debating politics and stuff. And they say, well, social media. I said, so you live in an echo chamber? And you can't formulate opinions. And just click on the first of those tales, and your algorithm will light up with more and more and more, because they have already all got 145 million likes. And these guys are making money. When you get to your first level on YouTube of, where they begin to pay you, you get your 4,000 hours in a year with 1,000 subscribers, you start to make $3 a month. You need sponsors, and you got to build your audience. And the sponsors are going to say, well, listen, everybody wants to hear about the UFO that stood on top of the pyramid. So this is what you got to make, or I ain't going to be a sponsor of your video. Well, gee, Mr. Sponsor, you're going to give me $1,000 this month. I'm going to make 5 of them for you. And that's what's going on. And it's a 10,000 dumb ideas to one rational, good, and intelligent idea. And that's all over the place. And learning to listen with a great degree of skepticism is the beginning of a Gnostic approach to the information. Because information and knowledge are not the same thing. And information has been abused and called knowledge. I could take any statistic and make it read anything you want me to derive out of it.
Amen. Or whatever you guys say in the Gnostic Church. I love that.
Yeah.
What do you guys say in the Gnostic Church?
Say that again?
What do you guys say in the Gnostic Church?
What happened here?
What do we say in the Gnostic Church?
Yeah, when you pray. There's some sort of
Gnostic prayer. I did write an article on that. Because you're not praying to any external thing, right? So really what it is a rumination. We might start with a line of Holy Writ. I am the heart, and the snake is entwined about the invisible core of the mind. Rise, O my snake, it is now is the hour of the hooded and holy ineffable flower. Rise, O my snake, into brilliance of bloom on the corpse of Osiris afloat in my tomb. I'm going to start forgetting after that. But I might take that first verse of Liber 65 and start to ruminate on it. What's that saying? What? I am the heart. Is that me we're talking about? Or my holy guardian angel? And I might start to go that way. Or I might compare it to some other, Holy Writ somewhere else that obliquely references.
That sounds really Orphic.
That sounds really
Orphic? Like you've got the whole rhyme structure down and you're using it kind of hexameter. I mean, you could apply a hexameter to it. That's Greek poetry right there,
Yeah. And as sacred writ, that poetry comes alive in you. We tell people when you memorize one of those 5 chapters, you're really having your first experience with your holy guardian angel, even though you're not aware of it. And it goes on from there.
I was going to say the Sibylline prophecy spoke in the hexameter.
Yeah.
It wasn't an actual, prophecy unless it was in hexameter.
Right. That's how they checked it.
Yeah, the Oracle of Delphi, for sure.
Hex being the sacred number 6 from which we weave a spell. The hex.
And sex and jex and yeah.
What's that old blues song? I put a hex on you.
Oh, yeah.
'Cause you're mine.
I actually heard something about the hex that was really kind of interesting. This guy, Museum of Tarot, was talking about the flower of life. And the flower of life came from a 1970s guru guy who didn't know what the hell he was looking at. And so he saw this little glyph on the side of a tomb in Egypt. It was kind of the flower of life shape. And it's like, this is the most holy shape there is. And they formed this whole geometry out of the flower of life that really wasn't present in the original sketch. Well, this guy went back and looked at the original data, and what that was a hex sign. It was a Christian putting a curse on the Egyptian gods. And so that's what the flower of life was, according to the archaeologists that were reading it out. So it was kind of interesting because if you look at DNA structure, it looks exactly like that flower of life. So yeah, under the electron microscope,
right?
That's the impression you get from it. Well, if Jesus is the Son of Man and this hex sign goes all the way up through the Amish, why they could actually have a connection to that original Christian magic.
You got to realize the original Christian symbol was an X, a key,
right,
or chi, right. So the chi rho was the letter R, which would look like a P, and the chi, and in this sign in signa, in hoc signia, right, signa. So the chi rho, the Pope holds up a stick with a cross with an X on it, because that's the chi rho. Okay, so these symbols are deep and come out of Greco-Roman tradition. The Catholic Church, really set out in a certain sense to do something good, to grow. Christianity was sweeping the land. And while these religions are terribly dead and misunderstood today, we do need a new religion. We need something new in our culture. I think the holy books of Thelema offer that. They offer new symbols. They offer a fresh start. And I think that's what makes the Thelemic Qabalah real magic.
I think there's so much deep meaning you can get out of the Greek stories themselves. And then once you start to apply that to the Greek language,
right,
and the understanding between the two is like a mind-expanding experience.
Well, every language has its mystical connection when you can speak it, right? So yes, with the Greeks, and as such a learned culture, right? And of course, the holy books of Thelema are written in English, and it's the American language. Okay, I think Crowley would have tried to argue for the British, but I really believe that America is the third temple. And that's my own speculation, right? But it all makes sense. The book of the law makes sense for American culture. British culture kind of died when we became the world's currency in 1950. The British Empire finally just died. And while they pretend to empire yet, that's great. There's still a largesse about Great Britain. But without America, they're very tiny. Yeah, we are huge. We are Rome. We are Egypt. And those were the first two temples.
Have you ever read America's Destiny by Manly P. Hall?
I've not read that particular tract by him. I didn't even really know it existed, but it sure fits in with Rosicrucian themes, because there's that one I think a video on it that the Utopia that came out with the Rosicrucians, and some claim was really what they were trying to do with the Masons here in America, because Franklin was connected with the American Masons and the French Rosicrucians.
Are you talking about the 68th the 68th Convocation by the Rosicrucians in Pennsylvania?
No, I don't know anything of that.
They picked out the American seal, the pyramid with the eye on it. They picked that out in 1916, and it was later adopted in 1932. That was their symbol in that book.
The founding fathers
Joel.
Of the Renaissance. They were reading Greek for the first time. All these documents that belonged to the Arab world that got translated back into Latin, into their tongues. So we lost a lot with the rise of modern science and the establishment of the Roman cleric world. And you'll notice that as the Renaissance comes, the clerics, the Roman Church lost power, and we became a more secular culture. Well, the opposite happened in Arabia, where their culture was much more enlightened than the European culture. But the clerics rose, and the knowledge index went down. Okay. And so we see the way power regulates itself. We see the modus operandi of power and what happens when that power goes unchecked. The secularism in our culture checked the clerical culture, and the clerical culture is checking the secular culture in the Middle East, right? That's not to say we don't have all sorts of strains of religiosity and spirituality in our culture. America's rife with it. There's a yoga center right down the street. Just make a point.
Right.
Well, I believe that American folk magic was probably one of the dominant religions until about 1850. That's a long time for American folk magic to exist as sort of like an open practice.
Well, you haven't been to a Pentecostal session then, I guess.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what it became. But it was far more local and practiced on that level before 18.
It's always been a folk magic. It was always considered an ignorant magic. It was a magic of the uneducated people. Pagan means folk.
Yeah.
Close to the land.
Yeah. So you got an uneducated people very close to the land. And I'm sure there was, lots that they were able to do and lots that they learned. But don't conflate that with high magic. Don't conflate that with the magic that belongs to the intelligentsia and the educated world.
I wanted to mention, actually, in regards to magic and what you mentioned earlier about hex and six and sex even is in there too, right? Phonetically, they're not just by chance.
Not at all.
Similar, right? And it goes back to, in maybe one stream anyway, Heka, a god in Egypt of magic.
Right.
And right next to that is the measurement system of Egypt, which has hecats in 64ths, right? And that's related to the eye of Osiris and what we would say the evil eye, because of its connotation of magic power.
No,
so I just wanted to mention that.
All the origin stories of the world had a god and a goddess, right? And God and the goddess mated, and baby gods, demigods were born.
Right.
And you keep descending down till you get to man, right? Now there's some stories like Ptah in Egypt. Well, he just masturbated and that created all the worlds. And probably that's why Judaism became very patriarchal. Because they really borrowed heavily from Egyptian culture. But in the male and female pair, that gets hidden in the Qabalah because they had to switch from a dualistic philosophy to a monotheistic philosophy. And so they had to hide the gods.
Have you ever heard of the Hydos Gamos?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Latin phrase.
No, it's a Greek phrase that means holy, sacred, and it implies sex between a god and a goddess. And
okay. I've not heard that, but that certainly makes sense.
Right.
Because it's the generation of life.
Right.
That's an awesome power.
The very first god and goddess in the Greek myths was Uranos and Gaia. And so these two, the meeting between the earth and the sky is where everything is happening. And that's the birth of the gods. All of the Titans come from them, and then later the Olympians. But the whole idea there is
what happens to him is another problem. We're back to
the separation. It's like chaos and order, separation and union. Like these are the main themes of all of the theogony. And having those as the core of it really does change once you start to understand that penetrated all their language. So death and the god of death were the same word, so everything was put into the context of the gods in the Greek language.
One thing I've noticed in cosmology and theology too, as we're discussing, but may not be kind of formulating it this way, is that there is practically always the male and the female, and the truth and the chaos, or God and its detractor. There's these two pairings quite frequently, if not always, dare say always.
The fire and the water.
So
we're missing that in our current language. We don't have that sort of context. Instead, it's all based around Jesus. And it's like, how is that life affirming? You've got a guy up on a cross all the time. That's like an affront to Zoe.
Dying. It's all he does is die. He judges the dead. Yeah, and if you're a good boy and girl, you'll get to go there and see him one day.
Right.
Little bit of luck, you'll be at the bar at hell, because it's got to be boring up there. So above the abyss in the highest world of the Qabalah is the lux, the LVX, the light.
Right.
The divine. It emanates down into Tiferet, the heart, the soul, becomes the Adam Kadmon, who in Hebrew Kabbalah secretly hides the Shekinah. But we can assert that the Adam Kadmon is, what is it when you're both sexes at the same time?
Hermaphrodite.
Divine hermaphrodite, yeah.
Yeah, hermaphrodite. So that its reflection and manifestation in the world gives us both male and female. Okay? The Shekinah, or Spirit of God, becomes Babylon, the sexual goddess that allures us to creativity. Now, in the Zohar, she's rejected. That's the only way for Joseph, I forget his name, to make good with God. And this is them moving towards their patriarchal culture. But in Thelema, that goddess, bedecked with her jewels and all her allures, is arousing the male to create life. So you get the union of the god and the goddess. Now, in Tantra, in Western Tantra, that can create more than physical babies. And there's a whole process of ideas of what that could possibly generate. And there's theories on it and whatever else. I think for a young couple that is disciplined, I think it can help them to find a unique spiritual height. There's great danger with opening that much energy for somebody really not prepared for it. And I think by the time most people really figure it all out, they're too old to do much about it. So we've got to understand that our world is a representation of the Bayun God, the light, the looks. And we are each male and female a part of that Bayun God, so that when we find that sacred conjugation, we find something quite divine. I think of the power couple. The power couple, they're going into politics and they're both going to be politicians, or the one's going to support the other, or or they're going into business, or they're establishing a church, right? They're all going to get, people for Jesus, but they're going to make $1 million. And whatever that power, good, bad, or indifferent, whatever that power couple's after, I think that form of sexual magic can be very, very valuable. Like I was saying before, when that translates to, outside of a committed couple, you run into danger because you better be working entirely with adepts who all know why they're there and are disciplined already for wanting to be there.
Well, there is a theory out there that the Greeks were high on sex drugs all the time. Like 24 hours a day, they were dosing themselves with sex drugs.
Yeah, and they kill people like crazy, but I ain't gonna kill anybody.
Well, like I was talking about snake venom.
The ancient world and the references back to that seem to validate and affirm a position that we might have, is more an abuse of Greek culture than it is really, really important, because the ancient world is something we don't have that mindset. We don't understand it. It's why I'm into Western magic, because even though we have a lot of Indian influence in this country, I wasn't born and raised a Hindu. I don't know anything of that culture. I couldn't give up Jesus for Krishna. I tried. I was a teenager, so I wasn't very disciplined. But I tried. And so we have to find our way through where we are. And this general trend of on the internet that is creating all these things. Well, the Greeks did this and the Assyrians did that, and whatever group did this or that, and the Mayans had a calendar, and we're all gonna die in 2020. Just like we were all gonna die when 1999 became 2000. What's the Seventh-day Adventists keep going up every year in the mountain. The Bible says it's today. Oops, wrong. Let's go back and buy back everything we own.
Well, I think it's interesting that you've got the story of Adam and Eve being centered around their nakedness, because that was like one of the hallmarks of Greek art, is that you had these nudes everywhere. And
the ancient world didn't have a problem with it.
Right. Well, somebody did, and they basically turned the first sin into being naked. So it's almost pointing directly at the Greeks. Like,
I don't think it was that they turned nakedness into a sin. Is that they had become aware that they were in the knowledge. The taking of the fruit was making them aware of their nakedness, and I think it was the moment in which they severed their tie to the natural world, the world that
also brought shame to our sexuality.
Yep, exactly,
right?
Exactly.
And women are still struggling to get out of it, and men, but they don't know it, because men can go fuck everything they want, and the woman, if she fucks everything she wants, she's a whore. It's the end of fucking for her. Okay, so we have this incredible urge for sex that is a major human drive in the psyche, especially in the younger person. And in the younger person especially, it's hyper. You know what I'm saying? Sex is only good at 5 times a day, which would be a horror story for me. Okay? No matter what I dream of in the locker room. So the Hebrews were putting shame on sex. They, mutilated the male penis for the same reason. The shame of nakedness was taught. It was not natural. But we can say this. Our nakedness is a backwardness. It's an uncivilized state in reality. We're not dogs. We don't walk down the street and say, "Oh, I think you're cute. Come on, let's fuck," and do it on the sidewalk. But a dog will. Okay, so we were trying to evolve out of our animal structure. The ancient world, nakedness was, especially in hot climates. You know what I'm saying? The loincloth was too hot, right? So and men fought naked. They fought battles. You know, so there was not the sexual taboo. We're stuck with the sexual taboo. Okay. And that hurts both sides. It has both sides accusing each other of all sorts of shit in our world today. And the ones that are fucking their brains out, they think they're, you know, around the sexual taboo, but they're not. They're just engaging that much deeper.
Right. Well, I mean, it goes back to fertility rituals, because they had massive fertility rituals that were basically just public fucking. You know, I mean, that was something that was very hallmark to the Greeks. When you take that, you've got orgy was part of certain sacred rites, right?
You know, remember you did have the Scarlet Woman, the temple whores, and these were elevated women of high respect. You know, in a culture that we cannot understand because we are victims of the sexual taboo.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's good today that we can at least begin to talk about it. But again, there's those 10,000 voices that got nothing good to say. So it's going to be a tough time getting through it yet.
Well, I just think it's interesting the difference in perspective, because you can really see it playing out in 1st and 2nd century AD and BC. Like all this public sex and fertility stuff really started to come up against other pressures in that kind of world. You know? Especially
the taboo was growing.
Right.
Taboo was growing, right? So as we grew into full Christendom, and that would still take another 700 years, that taboo developed into the mores of its time. And so, you know, the bride walks down the aisle in a white outfit because she's never been touched. And the groom can be in black because who the fuck cares how many people he fucked? But she's got to come pure and virginal. And we can prove whether or not she's a virgin. We can't do the same for the guy. So we built this two-tiered society where the taboo holds itself to both sides. You know, the guy that is, you know, fortunate enough to be, you know, a whore, he loses his respect for his whole feminine half. I think the women that truly remain chaste lose respect for their whole masculine half. And so we're all dying in this culture and trying to find our way through it. Some are going to evade the sexual issue altogether. I'm going to become a monk, right? Some are going to find how wackadoodle they can get with their sexuality until they end up in the nightclubs that open up at 2:00 in the morning when the bars are shutting down. Okay.
Well, I think it's funny how cultures that sort of kept a hold of this idea of fertility and went into the modern world of mores and cultural, you know, shame, they still carry around these big giant dicks. Like in Japan, they have huge penis festivals, representative of those early fertility rites. And so,
well, yes, a giant penis became a symbol of fertility, right? Okay.
And they still marching around there. In India, too, the phallus of Shiva.
Yeah, the fact that what's that that shape? I'll try to draw it here. Vesica Pisces, the Vesica Pisces. That's the female genitalia, right? And the religious symbol appears inside the Vesica Pisces, right? So you put the what's the third part of God? The Holy Spirit into a dove, and you put it in the Vesica Pisces, and he becomes the semen that goes into the cup, the vagina, where the semen is nursed and becomes a baby. Now, it was thought in the old world quite incorrectly that, you know, the semen was already a full baby. So there's all Kabbalistic potions on how to create a homunculus.
Right.
Have you ever seen the top view looking down on the Washington Monument?
Oh yeah.
No, I didn't go there myself. I went from the bottom and stayed there.
It's Osiris's phallus inside of the Vesica Pisces.
It's a penis right inside a vagina, right there. This is right in Washington, D.C.
Those Masons and Rosicrucians were very aware of the symbols. The whole layout of Washington, D.C. I talk about in my book, The Starry Gnosis, about the whole starry layout of Washington, D.C. I think it's really important to understand the mystical roots of the American ideal,
right,
and how it competed with the Calvinistic ideal that came here as Puritan.
Well, and that whole idea of the obelisk and the Vesca. I mean, you got to figure they're putting forth symbology to generate a new nation. So it's this fertility that they're trying to instill as the base of the creation of the nation itself, symbolically, you know.
All the tribal
weren't having sex in the Masonic halls, you know what I'm saying? If they were, you know, there's some people, we got to get to know them better, but keep your hands off my shoulders.
Paul, but I think also that they kind of got it a little bit backwards in that the penis itself is not a symbol of fertility, but actually the scrotal sac, the scrotum, the sperm, that is the fertility. The ovary.
Well, that's where the semen originate. It's just
correct. And
if the eggs originate far deeper inside the vagina.
Correct. And so if you look at, embryology, you do see that the labia of a female ends up becoming the outer scrotal sac of the testes. So when you talk about the Vesica Pisces, you're talking about one and the same, just a morphology movement based on your genetic, architecture. But the other thing,
I might have an incorrect male perspective.
Okay.
But because the male sees the erect penis going in through the labia, and that's his primary concern. Okay. The more experienced man wants to figure out how to bring the woman to more sexual fulfillment. And so he'll experiment more with the clitoris, as long as you don't tell him that the clitoris is actually longer than his penis. Okay. and the female is far more sexually susceptible. She will go into an erotic trance. So Crowley used this in his magic. He would stimulate the female to an erotic trance so that her personality will step outside of her body, and the invoked God then will assume the body. And that's how the sexual rite worked.
Right.
Unless, of course, they were doing another rite, which actually creates a baby. But that's a whole different thing.
Now, the clitoris actually forms the head of the penis in embryology, but I'm talking about the labia itself forms the outside part of the scrotal sac. And in, at least with cattle production, we measure the circumference of the scrotum of bulls in order to dictate how fertile his daughters will become. And so there is that type of parallelism across at least domestic animals that you can look at in terms of testes and scrotum and all that stuff to indicate fertility, whereas the female, the fertility is within the ovaries.
Fertility and sexual ecstasy are two different things.
Correct. But one primes the other.
The erect penis and the labia are kind of the bosses. Because he really doesn't have that much control on what's going on inside the vagina. He can, go for the G spot. And that's so far towards the front that he's still not in foreign territory there. So in that ecstatic experience, because this is something that gets prolonged, there's a certain insanity that goes to the female, and the male needs to maintain a control where the female needs to learn how to let go. And letting go is a danger for her, and losing control is kind of a danger for them both. So when you're building up this ecstasy to an inspirational point that you're pulling in spirit, that you're moving energy is something that Thelema called the formula of on, because the sex happens in one Sephiroth on the tree, and it happens in the path between two Sephiroth on the tree, I should say, each being the male and female Sephiroth, Netzach and Hod. And they travel the tower at 2. And as she receives the energy, she brings it up to Tiferet.
Okay.
And then he takes it back down, and they start the circulata, to use an alchemical term, where they make the energy go round and around and around. And they're playing with the undulating spasms of orgasm, which for both is an involuntary action. There is a reason why laughter is considered an orgasm. It's an involuntary reaction. And some boys do figure out that if she's laughing at my jokes, I got a chance for a date. Okay? Because it endears us. Just the way sex partners become endeared to each other. You start hanging out with a prostitute, you're really endearing yourself with something you might not want to play with.
Which is all the basis of oxytocin secretion.
Of what?
Oxytocin secretion. Oxytocin is the primary hormone during orgasm, during lactation, during copulation, of bonding, laughter, and so forth. And so that is like to have during fertility or during a fertile moment or whatever, the heightenedness of orgasm, the heightenedness of oxytocin actually propels and makes the fertility effort that much more effective, so to speak, because there is thought how in the interaction or the foreplay or even within conversation, and there has not even been any kind of physical touch, the female ovary has already sent signals for the sperm that she has chosen within his testes. And so when the act happens, that is the ovum that has already sent the pheromonic chemical signals to that one sperm of 600,000 to be selected to penetrate her sternum pellucida. And then obviously you have that chemical reaction of zinc ions exploding, and then you have the boom or whatever, and then the manifestation or the ability to trap spirit into matter, the singularity, which is what CERN is trying to replicate all over again.
Yeah, they're trying. I still think that the miracle of the human body is stupendous, and
I do
will
too.
not reduce this to a machine. I feel so sorry for young people today. What do they call those guys that have no access to sex? They have a name for them now.
Incels.
The incels, yes.
Yeah.
If the guys ain't getting it, the girls ain't getting it either. And they're all busy online, and they're afraid to talk to each other. They're all trapped in their phones. And it's no wonder they're reaching for a machine. I mean, even these robots they're building now, right? You can go get your sex robot. And the old way is still the best way. Hi, how are you? Can I buy you a drink? Would you like
and that's
to
the whole thing. That's the whole thing, is we are the mystery.
Yes.
And when we're looking for all these exterior things, we're resolving ourselves of, knowing thyself and seeking the true self.
Yeah. But the true self is us, right? In the here and now.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And my true self will be my true self until the day I die. Whatever happens after that is speculation.
Yeah.
But while I'm still breathing, and I've lived more years now than I'm gonna live, I can count it with a reasonable guess how much time I got left. And that's the life to grab. There's a wonderful Hindu story. A man falls into a well, but before getting to the bottom, he manages to grab a branch and hang on. As he looks down, he sees at the bottom of the well is a whole bunch of poisonous serpents. And when he looks up, there's a whole swarm of bees. So if he manages to climb out, he'll get stung to death. And if he falls, he'll get stung to death. In one moment, a drop of honey falls down, and he reaches out with his other hand and catches the drop and tastes that honey. In this moment, you are real as I am real, and you are God as I am God. Get to this moment. And every moment, get to this moment. And you can develop a force of psyche. Whether you take that into sex magic or reading holy books or both or whatever, or into your art and your painting and your music playing. It doesn't matter which way you go. It's just a matter of my poor dog. It's this moment that you're trying to get to, that moment of orgasm. We all say, I come. You're coming to this moment. I've arrived. That's how they used to say it. I've arrived. Now it's I come. Would you want to come? Did I make you come? Please, dear, tell me I made you come. Let me know that I'm viable, that I'm truly a man. You can see that I know all the problems of younger boys.
Well, you were one yourself at one point, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I walked funny when she looked at me too. I just forgot how to walk.
It's just the flesh that gets older.
Yeah. And then the pipe dreams get more realistic.
Right.
You know, there's a joke, and a young man comes upon an old man sitting on a park bench, and the old man's crying, weeping, crocodile tears. He says, "Old man, what's the matter?" And the old man says, "I married a girl 40 years younger than me. She cooks like a dream. It's the best sex I've had in years." The young man says, "Well, then why are you crying?" He says, "I can't remember where I live." That was a lot funnier to me.
Was there? Unfortunately, just because due to the time, I do have to get going, and this show's way over 2 hours. Is there anything else anybody wanted to add before we start wrapping this up? No? Okay. All right, Paul. Thank you so much. Before we close it, I will let the other people plug themselves. Headless, you want to let everybody know where they can find you, please, good sir.
Yeah, find us. Find our subreddit, please.
Wait, hold on. Hold on. I'll let you go last, Paul. Yeah, I was asking Headless. Yeah, Headless. And Headless, you're muted, Headless. 1 second, Paul. Hold on.
I am muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, so you can find me on Headless Giant podcast on YouTube. And if you want to send me an email of your occult, esoteric, magical stories, you can check out my email address is headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com. We're reading a bunch of them probably on Wednesdays or Thursdays, so come check that out.
Oh, yeah, please. Send them over if you got any. And Robby Marx, real quick, Robby, let everybody know where they can find your stuff as well, please.
Yeah, first and foremost, I'm an artist. I also have my podcast, the MetaMindcast. But you can check out all my stuff. Social media, everything is at my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX. And that'll pull up everything.
Awesome. Thank you, Robby Marx. And Ethan Indigo, let everybody know where they can find your writings, please, sir.
That was awesome. Thank you, Paul, for presenting that and everyone. And I'm on the usual social media and so forth, and Amazon and elsewhere. Got a bunch of articles out there too. So
awesome.
And I'll just say thank you to everybody. I thought great questions, wonderful ideas, and you made it fun for me.
Awesome. Good. And Paul, now you can let everybody know where they can find your stuff, please. Let them know.
They can find me on Reddit. Look for me on Reddit, our church subreddit, Gnostic Church of LVX, the Gnostic Church of Light. Look for us on Facebook. Those are places where you can interact with me. Find our Gnostic Church of Light YouTube. Lots of great stuff. I love the video I put up today. I just really think it has something to say. And we talked a bit about it, problem with Plato and Aristotle. So you can dig a little bit deeper there. Find my blog, pauljoseph.rovelli.blogspot.com or something like that. You won't have hard. And you could just type my name into the internet and
you'll come up. Definitely will show up, yes.
Even say something nice.
And I'll add, I'm sure I have links from the last time, and I will include those as well in the show notes. Again, thank you all for coming on. I appreciate it. Oh, and we did have Juan. His links are in the bottom. He did have to leave early, so he couldn't plug himself. So, check out his show. I think you guys will get something out of it. And again, the links are in the bottom. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.